Hi everyone, my name is Tom Pettit and welcome back to another episode of Beyond Come Follow Me. This week we are looking at the historical context and the stories surrounding section 63. That's the section you are studying in your Come Follow Me lessons this week. I'm going to share with you some of those historical stories so that some of the verses in section 63 make a little bit more sense, knowing what the Lord was really answering to some of the things that were going on in Kirtland at this particular time. Before I do, I want to give you an update on our indexing challenge. It's been 2 weeks now, about 2 weeks, since I extended an invitation to this Beyond Come Follow Me community to start indexing, and we as a community have a collective goal of indexing 1 million names by the end of July, and we are well on our way. There's 3 ways to report your numbers. You could do so through familysearch.org. Search for the group, which is my name, Tom Pettit, Beyond Come Follow Me. Just search that and click to join that group, and your numbers just get tracked automatically. Or you can email me your numbers that you've completed at storiesoftherestoration@gmail.com, or you can just put the number in the comments below this video. All 3 ways, all the numbers come to me. I'm keeping track of it all. So here's the update. The familysearch.org group has about 700 members. Now today's June 5th when I'm recording this, and there's about 700 members, and we've got about 75,000 indexed names or reviewed names that group has collectively accomplished in just these short few days. What is amazing is that there's more people outside that group that are just reporting to me directly, and the direct response has garnished about 70,000 names. So as a collective community, we have indexed 145,000 names so far. It's only June 5th, and I think we are going to smash this million number goal that we have. One of the things that has surprised me the most is we have a few people, and it's great. I'm glad we have them. We've got a few people who are in the routine of indexing, have been before I extended the invitation, and that's great that they're part of this group, and I'm grateful for them. But the vast majority of people that are accumulating these names into this indexing challenge are first-time indexers. And so when we look at 145,000 names that have been indexed, the vast majority of those would not have been indexed by this time had it not been for all of you first-timers that are joining in. And so we're not counting work that's already being done or would have been done had the challenge not gone out. This is 145,000 names that wouldn't have been done unless you, has nothing to do with me, unless you, the viewer, unless you hadn't made that leap of faith to try something new, to find the time, to look for an opportunity to index. And you first timers, which is the vast majority of you, you're turning in count numbers of like 10 and 15 at a time. I get a lot of emails where people say, I've done 4 and 5 names. It all counts. It all goes into the bucket. So yes, we've got some people who have been regulars that are doing 1,000 names each week. We love them. We admire them. We're grateful that they're a part of the group. But this 145,000 that we've done, this is like really new names, and so it's exciting. And so if you're not involved, get involved if you want. And if you do get involved, then I think before the end of July, we'll be able to say, look what we've done, 1 million names. And then by August 1st, we'll see how much we've done in addition to 1 million. So that's the update. Okay, this week in section 63 is what we're looking at. The Come Follow Me manual gives a section about Ezra Booth. And they do a perfect job of explaining what's needful for that particular study in the Come Follow Me lessons. But of course, we're here at Beyond Come Follow Me, so you probably want to know a little bit more before and after that story that the church highlights in the manual. And so that's what I'm going to share with you today, along with some other things that are going on. And then I'm going to dive in and look at section 63, because there's trouble in Kirtland. And the Lord, I'm going to tell you what the trouble is. I'm going to tell you in 63 how the Lord addresses it. But more importantly than that, I'm going to show you in section 63 how the Lord teaches how to avoid, we can avoid the problems that a lot of saints in Kirtland fell into. And we look at the history, we read section 63 and we say, man, this doesn't really even make sense. And if it did, it's just applicable to Kirtland saints. I'm going to show you that the problems they had, they might not be identical to the things that we face today, but the same spiritual traps that they fell into are available for us to fall into today. And I'll point out, you got to look for it, and I'm going to point it out, how what's happening in church history at this time. The Lord gets very prophetic in speaking to us today to help us avoid those same pitfalls and challenges that they fell into. Okay, so Ezra Booth, we've talked about him a little bit, and we're going to talk about him a little bit more in sections that are coming that speak to him specifically. But I'll keep it focused on just what's going on in section 63 and not get too crazy. But Ezra Booth, he was always seeking religion. He was always very religious. He sought after God and answers to his prayers. He studied the Bible. And as he got older, it was time to make a career choice, and he chose to be a Methodist preacher. That's how spiritually driven he was. Well, he was also, being a Methodist preacher, he was also influential in the community in which he lived, which was Hiram, Ohio. Hiram, Ohio is about 30 miles to the south of Kirtland. He was friends with the Johnsons, John and Elsa Johnson, and last week I told you about the miraculous healing of Elsa's arm. I'm going to give some background to that story as well. So if you don't know that story, jump back a week and you can get caught up. I'm not going to retell it here. So the Johnsons were somewhat new to the Hiram area. They had moved there in the late 18-teens, and now here we are in the early 1830s. So they'd been around 12 or 14 years in Hiram. Well, like a lot of people, they got their lives disrupted in the year 1816. They were living more northeast than where Ohio is, in the New England area. And in 1816, unbeknownst to them, the Johnsons, or anybody else that was living in New England at the time, over in Indonesia, a volcano blew its top, Mount Tambora. And all that soot and the ash and the smoke headed up into the stratosphere, came across to the Western Hemisphere, and just kind of stuck itself over New England. And that caused some problems in New England. Most people were farmers. And when you have all this junk in the atmosphere, not letting the sun come in and do its thing with the crops weren't working. They weren't happening that year. And it changed the weather patterns for that summer to the point where in June, there was a deep frost, killed all the crops. They hurried and replanted. And then in July, another deep frost killed all the crops. They hurried and replanted. Same thing in August. Deep frost came and killed all the crops. And so the Johnsons recognized this as an opportunity to change. And so they decided to move west, and they moved to Hiram, Ohio. I'm giving you all this background, and we're going to get around to Ezra Booth, don't worry. But I'm giving you all this background to show the Lord's hand in getting the Johnsons to the right place at the right time. And in a particular situation, financially situation, to where they could be a tremendous asset to the church, not only financially. 2 of their sons would become apostles. And so they gave everything to the church. They would, and Joseph would need them. It wouldn't be long until Joseph would move in with the Johnsons. And in coming Revelations, you'll see that they were received in Hiram, Ohio, at the John Johnson farm. All of this is relevant to Ezra Booth. I'm going to tell you more about the Johnsons and the Johnson farm and their apostle sons and everything else as we get to those revelations. But that's just a little bit of a background so that we can see what's happening here with Ezra and understand his whole story. Interestingly enough, if you have heard of that story about Mount Tambora moving people out of New England, the Smiths were one of those families. And if you've read the book Saints or done other research in church history, you see that 1816 is when the Smiths also left. Same situation, same circumstances. They went west looking for better farmland as well, getting them into the right place at the right time. Joseph Jr. would testify in the Pearl of Great Price, as history recorded there, that the hill was conveniently located to his home, so they were escorted by the hand of the Lord to Palmyra, because of one of the circumstances was because a volcano on the other side of the world blew up and forced people out of New England. Well, so like the Smiths moving west by the hand of the Lord, so the Johnsons were moving west because of the same circumstances, also by the hand of the Lord. Well, this Ezra Booth was influential in the town of Hiram, where the Johnsons were, and he and the Johnsons became great friends, close friends, in fact. Well, as church history was going on and the Booths and the Johnsons were living their life in Hiram, we get Joseph to Kirtland. The church is starting to grow there in Kirtland. And one of the Johnson boys, he goes to Kirtland on business. And he comes back home to his parents' home in Hiram with a copy of the Book of Mormon and a testimony of the truthfulness of the work, God's work, that's occurring 30 miles to the north in Kirtland. Well, this got the attention of Mother and Father Johnson, and they were interested. And they didn't want to go into it too blindly, of course. They wanted to have all the information, not only from their son, and now from this book, so they invite their friend, the Methodist preacher, Ezra Booth, to come and investigate with them. So according to journals, they sat down in the Johnson home and they read the Book of Mormon all night. Pictured behind me is the room that they read the Book of Mormon in for the first time that night. Mother and Father Johnson, Luke and Lyman Johnson, their sons who would become apostles, probably other Johnson children, and Ezra Booth were all gathered in this room. The Johnson home in Hiram is owned by our church, and missionaries give tours there, and it's nearly original, the home. And so what you see pictured here, of course the furnishings aren't original, and it's just what we think that the room looked like, but the actual room, the walls and the windows, the door frames and the floorboards, this is where it happened. So they're reading the Book of Mormon all night. And they, the Johnsons and Ezra, get a testimony of the truthfulness of the work. As a result, they wanted to go to Kirtland, meet the prophet Joseph, and figure out their next step. You know, what's it going to be? Is it going to be baptism? Are we going to join this church? And if we do, what's the expectation? What would the Lord have us do? So they went to Kirtland to find Joseph with these questions on their minds. And during their time in Kirtland, they witnessed Joseph miraculously heal the arm of Elsa Johnson. That story was told in detail last week, but it's brought back this week because Ezra Booth was there, and he witnessed this miraculous healing. And because of the reading of the Book of Mormon, the spirit which he felt, the spirit testifying to him that it was true, and because of Elsa's miraculous healing, he decided that he was going to be baptized. It wasn't long after that Ezra was called to a mission to accompany Joseph to Missouri. And that was section 52. I went into great detail about that story, but they went to in section 52, he was called. They went, they're now returning. Last week I told you about what they did in Missouri and the sections previous to it was section 60 through 62 talked about them coming and returning to Kirtland from Missouri. Now we're back in Kirtland, and Ezra didn't have a good experience in Missouri. He, along with the rest of the missionary party, they were expecting more. Ezra particularly, he was expecting that paradisical glory to be there, and it wasn't. In fact, the quote that I gave you last week, I'll paraphrase it to remind you. He said, Zion is worth seeing, but it's not worth going to Missouri for. And even Joseph Smith, speaking about Missouri. Now, at the time, I know there's probably some good folks from Missouri that are listening today, and I've been to Missouri many times, and it's a wonderful place. We're talking the 1830s. Joseph himself said that Missouri was about a century behind the times. Now, whatever Joseph, high life of technology or whatever that Joseph was living in the 1830s, he was viewing Missouri as a century behind the times. So they came away from Missouri disappointed. This wasn't, when we think of Zion, we think of the Garden of Eden, perhaps. And this was not the Garden of Eden. In fact, there's many journal accounts of the saints entering the Salt Lake Valley with the same disappointment in their dialogue, in their journal entries, that they walked into Zion, they walked into the Salt Lake Valley, and they looked around and they said, "Are you sure, Brigham? This is the place? Oh boy, this doesn't quite look like Nauvoo or even Kirtland." And even one of my ancestors, who was from Scotland, she entered the Salt Lake Valley and she said, "This is Zion? This is Zion?" But she, along with the others, stayed faithful. But that wasn't Ezra's response to it. He went back to Kirtland and he was quite disappointed, and it made him upset, and it made him bitter. And he decided that he was going to leave the church because of this bitterness. And he started publishing articles, at least 6, in the local newspaper. And these articles were designed to slander Joseph and the church. President Joseph Fielding Smith, who was not there in Kirtland, but in speaking of Ezra and his story as I've just told it, he's quoted as saying, "Through the performance of a miracle, he was baptized." So the miracle being Elsa Johnson's arms being healed, and he being Ezra Booth. "Through the performance of a miracle, he was baptized. And from that time, he desired to make men believe by the performance of miracles." Elder George A. Smith also says that he believed Ezra's lack of faith had more to do with money than with miracles. And then, quote from Elder Smith, "He, having formerly been a Methodist minister, commenced preaching the gospel without purse or script, and he did so until he found it did not pay." And then George A. Smith continues. And this is foreshadowing a story that I'm going to tell in detail in a future video. But George A. Smith testifies truth in that Ezra Booth's apostasy culminated in collecting a mob who tarred and feathered the prophet Joseph Smith, and inflicted upon his family the loss of one of its number at Hiram, Ohio. As I tell that story of the tar and feathering, as it occurred years from chronologically of where we are now, George A. Smith is right. Ezra Booth was one of the men behind that deceitful act, despicable act, and it not only cost Joseph the pain and suffering and near death, but the door was left open, and it was a winter night, and it was cold, and Joseph's 10-month-old adopted son caught a cold from that exposure and ended up dying. So Ezra Booth, when he left the church, he couldn't leave it alone. And sometimes we find that with people who leave the church, they leave it, but they can't leave it alone. They just want to keep digging at it at times and in some circumstances. So before 63 is received, this is going on with Ezra. And now with a little bit of background as you focus on what the Come Follow Me manual asks you to focus and think about with Ezra Booth's story. Now you've got a little bit more context here, before and after of what the Come Follow Me manual has you focus on. Now there's other trouble in Kirtland, and at this point it's not widespread. And I say at this point, but it never really gets too widespread. But there becomes some apostasy in Kirtland. And when Joseph returns to Kirtland, he sees this. he receives section 63, and section 63 is answering some of the questions that lead to personal apostasy in this particular case. And so now let me go through those few verses, because there were some things that some of the members of the church, they didn't understand, and it caused contentions of the devil. You can only serve one master. And so through this line of confusion, which led to the contention, which led to a lack of spirit, which leads to a personal apostasy. And so the Lord explains in section 63 what led to some of this personal apostasy. And in section 63, the Lord teaches how to avoid these same spiritual dangers and pitfalls. So let me point out these two examples that I'm referring to. Section 63, verse 24. The Lord says, "And now behold, this is the will of the Lord your God concerning his saints, that they should assemble themselves together unto the land of Zion." We should go to there's Zion? A Zion on earth? And it's just a 1,000-mile walk to the west? I'm going. We're to gather to Zion. The Lord says gather to Zion. We're out of here. But finish off 24. "Assemble themselves together unto the land of Zion, not in haste, lest there should be confusion, which bringeth pestilence." So slow down. Everybody's excited. There's Zion. Let's go. Let's get there. And the Lord says, hold on a second. We're not going to go in haste. We're going to do this thing in an orderly fashion. And it was that people didn't like too much. What do you mean? I'm ready to go. The Lord said go to Zion. What do you mean I can't go to Zion? Let's continue here, because those are the questions they're asking. In verse 39, so how? I want to go to Zion. Joseph says, no, hold on, you can't quite yet. But the Lord says go. You're telling me not to? I'm out of here. But they need to keep reading. In verse 39, here's the answer to that problem. "Let my servant Titus Billings, who has the care thereof, dispose of the land." This is just kind of the preface here. The middle of 39 is where it really starts happening. "Dispose of the land, that he may be prepared in the coming spring to take his journey up unto the land of Zion, with those that dwell upon the face thereof, excepting those who I shall reserve unto myself, that they shall not go until I command them." So everybody's anxious to run to Zion, and the Lord says, put a break on it here. You're going to go to Zion when I command you to. In other words, it's a calling. And you haven't been called yet. And is there ever a time when we think that we fall into a spiritual trap of thinking that we could do that calling better than that individual? Or, hey, I'm qualified for this calling. How come I haven't received it yet? I know none of you have ever fallen into that trap, right? But it's a spiritual danger out there. And similarly, these people in Kirtland, they wanted to serve. They wanted to go. And when Joseph said, not yet, that put them off. Now, what was the problem with just opening the door and letting them go? Well, we got to look back into those sections about 50 through 58 or so, where the Lord is calling people like Ezra Booth, specifically by name and assignment, to go down to Missouri. And as they go down there and start to establish a store, a print shop, who's going to buy the land? Which lands are we going to buy? And people have been given callings to fill these assignments. It was to set up Zion as an inhabitable place. And when we get too many people going too fast, we're going to overrun the system. The system's going to be burdened and it's going to collapse. So we've got to go at the pace that this is going to work out. Now we'll see when the Missourians start to turn on the saints that this is one of several problems. That too many saints went too fast and they burdened the system of being able to live. And so this is the problem that the saints are having. I want to go to Zion, and the Lord says, hold on a second. We got to do this in the right way. And so we're going to do it by by way of calling. So let's go down now to 41, and the Lord gets very specific. Behold, I, the Lord, will give unto my servant Joseph Smith Jr. power, that he shall be enabled to discern by the Spirit those who shall go up to the land of Zion, and those of my disciples who shall tarry. So again, we're going to send you saints as quickly as the system can accept you. The system being, you got to have a job and a place to live, and we got to put crops in, and there's got to be a city of Zion to actually go to. So we're going to do it in order. Well, so this is some of the problems. And so now as you look at 39 and 41, make it applicable to yourself and to see the warnings there that the Lord may be giving to us in our day. Here's another problem that some of the saints had. Verse 27. Wherefore, I the Lord will that you should purchase lands, and this is talking about in Missouri, that you may have advantage of the world, that you may have claim on the world, that they may not be stirred up unto anger. Okay, so the second line here, wherefore I the Lord will that you should purchase lands. Okay, the question is how? So we need to donate money to the building up of Zion, but you won't let us go to Zion? They're not understanding it until section 63 gets here and the Lord explains why we're doing it the way we're doing it. Excuse me. So how are we going to buy this land? Are you going to use my money? What's in it for me? Who's going to buy it? How are you going to determine which land you're going to buy and which land you're not going to buy? And so all these questions about policy lead to personal apostasy. And that has never gone away. This revelation was received in 1831, and here it is, 2021. And I'm not pointing fingers because all 16 million members of the church are in danger of falling into these spiritual traps of questioning and doubting the policy, which will be one of several steps leading towards apostasy. And so the problems that the saints were having in Kirtland are just as relevant to all members. I'm not, again, pointing fingers, but all of us need to be careful that when the Lord makes a policy change, to not confuse that with a doctrinal change, because the doctrine doesn't change, but the way the Lord continues to administer his perfect gospel can change, because this is a true and living church. And so we believe in revelation for the church via the prophet. And so at times when there's adjustments made, there's reasons for those adjustments. But because of the adjustments, we've got to be careful not to confuse procedural adjustments with doctrinal adjustments, because the doctrine doesn't change. It's eternal. And it's that we have our testimony on. It's not a 3-hour block of church compared to a 2-hour, or a home teaching assignment compared to a ministering assignment. It's not men witnessing a baptism and now anyone, male or female, as long as they've been baptized, can be a witness. These are the policy changes that Satan will sometimes use as a fiery dart to put our mind in the wrong place. But it's the doctrine that's unchanging. The ordinance of the baptism never got changed. It's still eternal. It's still necessary. Unless a man be born of the water and the Spirit, he cannot enter the kingdom of heaven. The process may change, but that doctrine of eternal truth has not. Same with the other simple things that I just gave. Are we losing out on our spirituality and our opportunity to come closer to Christ because we go to 2 hours worth of church instead of 3? No, because when that change happened, the Lord slipped in, come follow me. Does our opportunity to serve others change because we're no longer a home teacher or a visiting teacher, but now we're a minister? No, actually it's enhanced because we're now doing it in a higher and holier way. So was the old program bad? Absolutely not. So I've given very simple examples. But it's these sorts of things that tripped up the saints in Kirtland. And unfortunately, all 16 million members of us are also susceptible to these sorts of roadblocks and spiritual traps that Satan would love to ensnare us in. And so, boy, is Section 63 just about some history about buying lands and that sort of thing? No, it's not. This is prophetic for 2021. So in 27, you got to purchase lands. People start questioning, having all those questions. The Lord gives the answer. And let all the monies which can be spared, it mattereth not unto me, whether it be little or much, be sent up to the land of Zion, unto them whom I have appointed to receive. So the Lord says, hey, I'm going to appoint some people. We're going to give them a calling, probably even set them apart. And we're going to have them have this assignment. And then in 43, we continue. Nevertheless, let him, meaning in verse 42, Nuclei Witness, who he's talking to, in 43, nevertheless, let him impart all the money which he can impart to be sent up to the land of Zion. So the Lord in 27 says, yeah, buy lands. And then in these last two verses, 40 and 43, he says, I've got a system. It's going to work out. Now, policy changes. Yeah, sometimes we wonder, what in the world? For example, one of them was if you're going to be married civilly, you need to wait a year before you can go be sealed in the temple. And then the Lord revealed to President Nelson, that policy is going to change, and you no longer have to wait. You get married civilly, the very next that after you get civilly married in the morning, go to the temple in the afternoon and get sealed. There's no more waiting period. And then what happens? COVID comes, shuts the temples down. People still want to get married. So we're going to get married civilly, then got to wait a year? No. The temple got shut down. Get married by your bishop or your stake president. And then as soon as phase 1 hits, go to the temple and get sealed. Because the policy changed. Everything changes for the better. The Lord knows exactly what he's doing. And so we can look at, I bet you, that there's not a policy change that's occurred that we now look hindsight backwards 2020 and say, oh yeah, the Lord knew exactly what he was doing. I see now. And so that's the advantage of looking in the past in Section 63, but it's also our challenge in looking forward as well. So as we get into more sections into that were received in Kirtland, we're going to find more apostasy. And it's going to get so rough that the faithful saints get pushed out of town by the former saints. And so I introduce all of this and the concept for you to think on your own of what they're these policies that they're dealing with in Section 63, because it's going to start picking up steam, and it's going to continue to cause problems for those who aren't looking more big picture at the Lord's in charge. I don't understand all things, but I know the Lord doeth nothing, save it be for the benefit of his children, as Nephi testified. Also to answer their question of, hey, Zion's there, I want to go. And the Lord says, hold on a second. 120 years later, President David O. McKay gave a beautiful statement, explanation on the gathering of Israel. Now, I'm not speaking of the gathering of Israel that President Nelson is speaking of, where he's talking about gathering people on both sides of the veil to come closer to Christ. President David O. McKay is talking about the literal physical, okay, we gathered to Kirtland, now we're going to gather to Missouri, eventually we're going to gather to Far West, then we're going to gather to Nauvoo, now we're going to gather as a church body all the way to Salt Lake. And President David O. McKay says, yeah, that's the way we did it, but that's no longer the way we gather. At the physical gathering. In 1952, President David O. McKay traveled to Europe to select sites for temples in England and Switzerland. While there, he told a reporter, quote, we aim to keep our adherents, or members of the church, we aim to keep our adherents here instead of encouraging them to immigrate to Utah and other places in the United States. That's the end of the quote. And then he explained that the presence of temples would bring the blessings of Zion to the saints in Europe. Subsequent presidents of the church continued to pursue the goal of building temples wherever there were large concentrations of saints. In 1977, Elder Bruce R. McConkie reiterated that Zion exists wherever individuals gather together into the true fold of God through baptism and covenant. Referencing the people of Enoch, Elder McConkie taught, quote, "To create a stake is like founding a city of holiness. Every stake on earth is the gathering place for the lost sheep of Israel who live in its area." That's the end of his quote. The proliferation of temples and stakes, this is from the church website, the proliferation of temples and stakes throughout the world has provided Latter-day Saints with the advantages and blessings of gathering while also assisting in the continued gathering of God's children in their own lands. And what I've done the past few videos, I want to conclude with again. And that's just highlighting a couple of pretty cool gems from the section. 23, the Lord says, "But unto him that keepeth my commandments, I will give the mysteries of the kingdom, and the same shall be in him a well of living water, springing up unto everlasting life." Another one I liked is in 34. Now, in the preceding verses before 34, he's talking about the wicked and wars and fear and all that sort of thing. And then he says, "And the saints also shall hardly escape." I couldn't see that. I had it too highlighted. It crossed out the words. Excuse me again. So preceding 34, he's talking about wars and contentions and fear and that sort of thing. And then the Lord promises the faithful, "And the saints who shall hardly escape. Nevertheless," meaning, yeah, it's going to be all around you, all this bad stuff. "Nevertheless, I, the Lord, am with them." And he's with us if we do back in 23. "He that keepeth the commandments, I will give the mysteries of the kingdom." And so I love those two as they're paired up, as I'm pairing them up. And then in 47, I love this. It's very short, but it's great. "He that is faithful and endureth shall overcome the world." Brothers and sisters, that's section 63. That's the historical context of it. So I hope you enjoy studying the doctrine found in section 63. Don't forget to keep indexing. Remember, we're up to 145,000. I've been on here for about 40 minutes, so I bet you we're up to 150,000 now. So join the cause. We're going to get a million names indexed by the end of July. With that, enjoy your week and enjoy your study of section 63.